The Camel's Hump by Rudyard Kipling. The camel's hump is an ugly lump, which well you may see at the zoo. But uglier yet is the hump we get from having too little to do. Kiddies and grown-ups too, if we haven't enough to do, we get the hump, Camel's hump, the hump that is black and blue. We climb out of bed with a frowsly head and a snarly voice. We shiver and scowl and we grunt and we growl at our bath and our boots and our toys. And there ought to be a corner for me, and I know there's one for you. When we get the hump, Camel's hump, the hump that is black and blue. The cure for this ill is not to sit still or frowsed with a book by the fire, but to take a large hoe and a shovel also and dig till you gently perspire. And then you will find that the sun and the wind and the gin of the garden too have lifted the hump, the horrible hump, the hump that is black and blue. I get it as well as you, if I haven't enough to do. We all get hump, Camel's hump, kiddies and grown-ups too. Rudyard Kipling was an English author and poet who lived from 1865 to 1936. He was born in Bombay, India, and spent his early years there before moving to England at the age of 6. Kipling is best known for his stories and poems that celebrated the British Empire and its military achievements. As a young man, Kipling worked as a journalist and wrote his first stories for children. His most famous work is The Jungle Book, which tells the story of a boy named Mowgli who is raised by animals in the jungle. Kipling received many honors during his lifetime, including the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1907. However, his views on imperialism and race have been criticized in recent years. Despite this, his writing continues to be popular and influential around the world. Rudyard Kipling's poetry covers a wide range of themes. One of the key themes discussed in his poems is imperialism and the British Empire. Kipling was a strong supporter of the British Empire, and many of his poems celebrate British imperialism and the idea of the white man's burden. War and patriotism. Kipling's poetry often explores themes of patriotism, duty, and sacrifice, particularly in the context of war. Nature and the environment. Kipling had a great love of the natural world, and many of his poems celebrate the beauty and power of nature. Childhood and nostalgia. Kipling's poetry often has a nostalgic quality as he looks back on his childhood in India and reflects on the passing of time. Human relationships and social commentary. Kipling's poetry also explores themes of human relationships such as friendship, love, and family, as well as broader social issues. This is a list of his widely read poems taken from the website learnadoNewtonic.com. Please go to this website and try to read at least the first 2 poems given in the list, If and the White Man's Burden. The White Man's Burden is a poem written by Rudyard Kipling in 1899, which suggests that it is the duty of the white race to bring civilization to the so-called uncivilized people of the world. The poem was written in the context of American imperialism in the Philippines and was intended to encourage the United States to take up the burden of ruling over and civilizing the Philippine Islands. The poem suggests that the white man has a moral obligation to take on this burden, as it is the white man's duty to bring progress, education, and Christianity to the non-white people of the world. Kipling portrays the white man's burden as a noble and selfless task, despite the fact that it often involves the use of force and the suppression of local cultures and traditions. The poem has been both celebrated and criticized over the years, but it remains a powerful example of the way in which colonialism and imperialism were justified and glorified by writers and thinkers of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. I'm going to recite the poem The Camel's Hump by Rudyard Kipling. But remember, if you are interested in, you can create your own tune for this poem and sing it. The Camel's Hump by Rudyard Kipling. The camel's hump is an ugly lump, which well you may see at the zoo. But uglier yet is the hump we get from having too little to do. Kiddies and grown-ups too, if we haven't enough to do, we get the hump, Camel's hump, the hump that is black and blue. We climb out of bed with a frowsly head and a snarly voice. We shiver and scowl and we grunt and we growl at our bath and our boots and our toys. And there ought to be a corner for me, and I know there's one for you. When we get the hump, Camel's hump, the hump that is black and blue. The cure for this ill is not to sit still or frowsed with the book by the fire, but to take a large hoe and a shovel also, and dig till you gently perspire. And then you will find that the sun and the wind and the gin of the garden too have lifted the hump, the horrible hump, the hump that is black and blue. I get it as well as you, if I haven't enough to do. We all get hump, Camel's hump, kiddies and grown-ups too. The Camel's Hump by Rudyard Kipling is a humorous and cautionary tale about the importance of work and industry. In the first stanza, the first line, the camel's hump is an ugly lump, refers to the physical feature of a camel's hump, which can be seen at the zoo or in the wild. The third line, but uglier yet is the hump we get, suggests that this human hump is even more unsightly or unappealing than the camel's hump. Here, the human hump can be any kind of unhealthy physical growth that can be seen either inside or outside the human body. This is a metaphorical hump that Kipling is referring to. Finally, the fourth line, from having too little to do, explains the cause of this human hump. Kipling is warning his readers that idleness and lack of purpose can lead to physical health problems. Kipling is using the metaphor of the camel's hump to caution against laziness and the importance of being industrious and productive. In the second stanza, the use of the repeated oo sound or the prolonged final syllable in the first two lines creates a sense of sing-song playfulness. The rhyme between to and do also reinforces the playful and rhythmic tone. The third line, we get the hump, is a metaphorical expression to suggest that idleness can lead to harmful health issues. The fourth line, Camel's hump, is a playful and creative use of language as Kipling combines the words camel and ridiculous to create a new word. This reinforces the playful tone of the verse and also adds to the sense of absurdity and exaggeration. The final line, the hump that is black and blue, uses color imagery to convey the negative effects of idleness. The color black is often associated with negativity or darkness, while the color blue can suggest sadness, sickness, or depression. By describing the hump as black and blue, Kipling is suggesting that idleness can lead to negative emotions and physical ailments. In the third stanza, the phrase used in the first line, frowsly head, creates a mental picture of people who would come out of the bed in the morning with a messy and untidy head. The second line, and a snarly yarly voice, is an example of Kipling's use of invented words, which adds to the playful and imaginative tone of the verse. The use of onomatopoeia with snarly yarly reinforces the sense of grumpiness and irritation that many people feel upon waking up. The third line, we shiver and scowl and we grunt and we growl, uses repetition and parallel structure to convey the idea that the speaker is feeling miserable and grumpy in the morning. The use of the verbs shiver, scowl, grunt, and growl also creates a sense of physical and emotional discomfort. The final line, at our bath and our boots and our toys, suggests that the speaker is feeling annoyed by the daily routines and obligations of life. The first line of the fourth stanza, and there ought to be a corner for me, suggests that everyone is vulnerable to developing the camel's hump from time to time. The use of the word corner creates an image of a secluded or hidden place where someone can go to be alone and deal with their sickness or negative emotions. Here, corner can be taken as a metaphorical expression for a hospital bed as well. The second line, and I know there's one for you, suggests that the speaker is not alone in feeling the effects of idleness or frustration. By addressing the reader directly and suggesting that they too are vulnerable to developing the camel's hump, Kipling is reinforcing the message that we should all strive to stay busy and productive. The repetition of the phrase, the hump, reinforces the central metaphor of the poem, and the use of the term camel's hump adds a sense of playfulness and absurdity to the verse. In this stanza, the first line, "the cure for this ill is not to sit still," suggests that idleness is a problem that can be overcome by taking action. The use of the word ill creates a sense of physical and emotional discomfort, and the use of the word cure suggests that there is a solution to this problem. The second line, "or frowsed with the book by the fire," suggests that reading and lounging around may be enjoyable activities, but they are not enough to cure the ill of idleness. The third line, "but to take a large hoe and shovel," also uses direct language to suggest that physical labor is a necessary antidote to idleness. The use of the words large hoe and shovel create a sense of concrete action and hard work. The final line, "and dig till you gently perspire," suggests that physical labor is not only necessary but also beneficial for both the body and mind. The first line in the 6th stanza, "and then you will find that the sun and the wind," suggests that nature itself is part of the solution to the problem of idleness. The use of the words sun and wind create a sense of natural energy and vitality, and they imply that these elements can work in harmony with human effort. The second line, "and the jinn of the garden too," adds a sense of mysticism and magic to the verse. The use of the term jinn suggests a powerful supernatural force that can work in harmony with human effort to produce positive results. The repetition of the phrase "the hump" reinforces the central metaphor of the poem, and the use of the term "horrible hump" adds a sense of urgency and discomfort to the verse. The repeated line "the hump that is black and blue" uses color imagery to convey the negative effects of idleness. The first line in the 7th stanza, "I get it as well as you," creates a sense of solidarity and shared experience between the speaker and the audience. The second line, "if I haven't enough to do," suggests that idleness is a common cause of the hump. The repetition of the oo sound in the rhyme creates a sense of playfulness and adds to the light-hearted tone of the poem. The third line, "we all get hump," reinforces the idea that the feeling of the hump is a universal experience that can affect people of all ages and backgrounds. The use of the word "all" creates a sense of inclusiveness and implies that the hump is a natural part of the human condition. The repetition of the phrase "Camel's hump" reinforces the central metaphor of the poem, and the playful language adds to the overall tone of the poem. What are the themes discussed in the poem "The Camel's Hump" by Rudyard Kipling? One of the key themes discussed in the poem is the negative consequences of idleness and a lack of purpose in life. The hump in the poem represents a physical manifestation of an unhealthy, inactive body. It also suggests the feeling of boredom, idleness, and lack of purpose. Kipling suggests that this can be harmful to our well-being, and having a physically active lifestyle and a purpose in life can lead us into a fulfilling, contented life. Another theme discussed in the poem is the importance of physical activities. The poem suggests that when we have too little to do, we can become listless, grumpy, and dissatisfied with our lives. The poem also suggests that the solution to this problem is to engage in productive activities such as digging or working in a garden, which can lift the hump and bring a sense of satisfaction and purpose. Another theme discussed in the poem is the interconnectedness of human beings and the natural world. The lines, and then you will find that the sun and the wind and the jinn of the garden too, suggest that human beings are connected to the natural world and that we can find meaning and purpose in our relationship with the environment. What are the techniques employed by the writer in the poem The Camel's Hump? The very first one is rhyming words. From the first stanza to the very last stanza, we can find rhyming words. For example, in the first stanza, zoo and do, these two words rhyme together. In the second stanza, the prolonged vowel sound oo is repeated. Hump, hump, those two are rhyming words. Then in this stanza, boys and toys. So like that, till the very last stanza, we can find rhyming words. Another technique is repetition. Throughout the poem, the writer has repeated some words and phrases. I have highlighted them in orange color. For example, the lines, we get the hump, camellia's hump, the hump that is black and blue, these are repeated throughout the poem. Then we can find sound devices like alliteration and assonance as well as consonants. I have highlighted examples for alliteration in red color. For example, sit still, book, by, here that, the, and the wind. The sound is repeated in this line. And then what about examples for assonance? Hump, ugly, lump. Sound is repeated. This is a nice example for assonance. The cure for this ill is not to sit still. E sound is repeated. Another technique used by the writer is imagery. Kipling uses vivid imagery to describe the physical manifestation of the hump and the process of overcoming it. Another technique is metaphor. The phrase the camel's hump can be taken as a metaphor. Kipling has used this metaphor throughout the poem. The camel's hump serves as a metaphor for the sickness, the feeling of boredom, idleness, and lack of purpose that the poem addresses. The onomatopoeic words like snarly, yarly, grunt, and growl help to create humor in the poem. The writer uses irony to suggest that the hump is a self-imposed burden and that the solution to the problem is within our control. The poem contains humorous elements such as the use of the word camellias to describe the hump and the prolonged final syllables in the second and the last stanza. Another technique used by the writer is anaphora. He has repeated some of the words in the beginning of some of the stanzas. For example, here, and there ought to be a corner for me, and I know there's one for you, and repeated in this stanza, and then you will find that the sun and the wind and the jinn of the garden too, and is repeated. These are examples for anaphora. So these are the techniques employed by the writer in the poem The Camel's Hump.
And that brings us to the end of today's session on Booktopia lessons. I hope you found it informative and educational. Thank you so much for tuning in. See you in the next lesson.